Ow.
I'm sick, but I'm not gonna let that stop me. Last month, the notorious anti-racism scholar and professor Abraham X. Kendi announced that he was laying off most of his staff at the Center for Anti-Racist Research, CAR. CAR was founded by Kendi in June 2020. Kendi's center was gifted 55 million US dollars, including 10 million from Twitter's co-founder, Jack Dorsey, with the mission to, quote, build an anti-racist society that ensures racial equity and social justice. Now, why I reference Kendi's Anti-Racist Research Center is for two reasons. When I think of, quote, novel ways to understand, explain, and solve seemingly intractable problems of racial inequity and injustice, I cannot help but think of another phenomenon which blew up around about the same time as Kendi's center's founding. A particular caliber of content creator emerged on YouTube with a very specific intent, message, and style. Their videos were not only exciting, theatrical, and unusually long, they also offered hope in a seemingly hopeless, pandemic-ridden zeitgeist. Like Carr, they claimed and were seen as a novel way for people to understand, explain, and solve seemingly intractable problems of racial, sexual, and general inequity and injustice. The second reason why I mention Kendi and Carr is because of a crucial point. Since its founding in 2020, Carr hasn't produced any original scholarship or research, like at all, despite over $50 million in funding, something that is unheard of in the social sciences and humanities. The center has recently faced allegations and an investigation into financial mismanagement. And this financial mismanagement includes Kendi himself approving a mortgage loan of $600,000 US to an unknown and unnamed professor. This loan was approved only 3 months after Carr's founding. It turns out that the unknown and unnamed professor is in fact Kendi's brother-in-law and was used by him to pay for his $5 million penthouse. Also, Kendi's brother is YouTube's global content policy lead, so that's a thing. Meanwhile, Kendi appears to be emerging relatively unscathed from all of this. Recently, he signed a contract with ESPN, yes, ESPN, the sports network, and is a presenter on a series about tackling racism in sports. He was also gifted $625,000 US from the MacArthur Foundation in 2021, and he also charges $20,000 US for any speaking appearance. Now, where have I heard somebody else trying to charge $20,000 US for a speaking appearance before?
So Destiny, I know you're watching this. I will come on your stream after you donate $25K to community movement builders here in Atlanta to address the Stop Cop City movement. If you drop $25K, I will come on your stream and we can have the most banal argument.
There it is. Although financially unscathed, Kendi's reputation will probably never reach the heights that it did in 2019 to 2020. Because at the end of the day, Kendi has proved himself to be a sellout. Now, personally, I don't care too much about selling out. Individuals have mortgages and rents to pay, they have families to feed, and of course, little luxuries to treat themselves to in order to get through the difficulties of everyday life. I don't care too much about selling out because my apolitics, or politics, depending on what you want to call it, really encourages me to see every individual for the individual that they are and is ultimately all about the individual. However, the underlying politics of BreadTube makes the very selling out, which it appears to be doing more and more so, inherently contradictory with the very tenets of their entire politics and with good video essayism. The devolution of BreadTube in the past year was probably inevitable. This devolution is what happens when moralizing the world comes at a cost that not many people are willing to pay. The cost of humanizing your enemies, the cost of putting the political cause before profit-making, branding, and views, as well as putting the moral principles you claim to align yourselves to before drama, clout, and the clique. So let's take a very deep dive into it. But hold up, as a YouTuber, I have to pay my bills. But I also have to tell you about something that will revolutionize your media consumption experience. Not for the better, but for the best. And that is why I am delighted to introduce to you and to thank Ground News for being the sponsor of today's video. In the past 2 months, Ground News has transformed the way I see media in two crucial ways. It's expanded where I get my news from and informs me where I'm getting my news from. Ground News is a website and app that has been created by a former NASA engineer, and it gives you a data-driven, expansive, and entirely transparent way to engage with and consume the news stories that we are bombarded by. I would basically say that Ground News is the ultimate way to make sense out of chaos. And this is so important in our social media era, where misinformation and partisan lines really taint the experience of trying to understand the world around us. I've personally always found the experience of reading newspapers incredibly daunting and never ending. But with Ground News, for every story, you get a concise and specific breakdown of every news outlet. That is, a breakdown of specific news outlets reporting, their headlines, their political bias, and how reliable a source they are and who owns them. You can sort and filter stories based on location, bias, factuality, and time, or whether or not a story is behind a paywall. So for instance, if I'm reading an article, I can simply copy and paste the URL of the article into the Ground News search bar. I then get a full breakdown of how the story is being covered by different publications and from the full extent of the political spectrum. Not only did I find it very interesting, but also incredibly important to compare how news outlets are reporting on the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Comparing headlines and reporting has made it possible for me to understand this entire landscape of misinformation that is running amok. I felt terribly overwhelmed by the misinformation, by the destruction of empathy and humanization in individuals talking about the current situation that is regrettably happening. To be able to make sense of the situation is crucial to understanding the new emerging world order and to understanding the potential future that is unfolding. And Ground News enables you to do just that. All I've been doing is copying and pasting the URL of, for instance, the live coverage I was reading on The Guardian into my Ground News account, and I get a full breakdown of over 250 sources of who is covering the story and how they are covering it, of the media outlets and sources broken down to minute detail. And that's not all. I would say that my favorite feature of Ground News is the blind spot feed. This feed highlights stories that are being covered disproportionately by one side of the political spectrum or not at all. And as I'm sure you know, just based on this channel and everything that I talk about, I am a big proponent for dispelling misconceptions, preconceived bias, and assumptions. And that is precisely what Ground News blind spot feature enables readers like you and I to do. For instance, my preconceived bias about how the media and the world works would make me assume that a story, such as 20,000 people marching at Johannesburg Pride against Uganda's anti-LGBTQ+ laws, would be covered by left-leaning media outlets. However, Ground News' intricate breakdown and data shows me that not one left-leaning media outlet has covered this story, whereas right-leaning and center-leaning outlets have. I think a breakdown like this is so important for us as readers to reclaim our sanity, especially when when the polarized tribalism so often pushed by media outlets and by political figures really stunts our ability to understand the full picture. And that is what I truly appreciate about Ground News. I get to see the full picture, and then I can go from there. Now, Ground News is currently offering all of my viewers an incredible 30% off their Vantage plan. The Vantage plan includes access to a fantastic feature called My News Bias, which is basically a dashboard that breaks down, compares, and contains all the data about your personal news consumption. You can see how your news consumption evolves over time. You can filter out your favorite topics and experience a diverse array of perspectives. And personally, that's something that I've loved doing. I've found numerous new news sources which I did not even know existed. So all I have to really say is, what are you waiting for? Go to ground.news/Kidology or use my link down in the description box. This is an incredible way for you to consume your news and to help support an independent business that is working tirelessly to make the media landscape more transparent, digestible, and clear for readers. Thank you so very much to Ground News for sponsoring today's video. And now, let us get back to it. BreadTube are what can be considered the unofficial thought leaders of the New Left. The rise of BreadTube can be linked to the widespread leftist backlash, on reflection, to the Obama presidency. A main characteristic of the New Left is their commitment to progressive historiography from the 2010s onwards as a way to explain the perceived failures of the Obama era. Progressive historiography dominated in US universities from 1910 to the 1940s. Back then, it referred to a heavy focus on the significance of class conflict in determining the course of American history. Progressive historiography resurfaced again in the form of the New Left, with one caveat. According to the New Left, progressive historiography is central to understanding the pervasive structural faults of American society and politics. However, for the New Left, it isn't class conflict that determines the course of modern history. Rather, it is the systemic historical oppression of marginalized groups, and particularly those with intersectional identities, that has determined the course of modern history, and which, crucially, Barack Obama failed to address in the ways promised all the way back in 2008. The narrative goes that Obama, who ran as a leftist populist, sold out. The New Left, and later BreadTube, emerged as a reaction to this, and have been picking up the crumbs ever since. Unlike the New Left of the 1960s, today's New Left are not so much in allegiance with traditional academia as their predecessors, nor are they as readily aligned to traditional revolutionary activism as were black radicals such as Malcolm X or Huey Newton. Their allegiance is to, quote, the soul of the internet. For instance, many of today's BreadTube creators were either educators themselves or left academia in order to pursue their online careers. The internet was recognized by the New Left to be the new marketplace of ideas. It was the domain in which to connect with a far larger and intersectional audience. This, at least before 2020, was largely the labor and domain of new leftist streamers, and their way of doing things was and remains to be markedly different. Vorsch contends that the soul of the internet pines for ruthlessness and vitriol. The problem, he says, is the online left before me was very academic, but what motivates conservative thought online is ruthless, aggressive content. It's contempt. That's what drives them. So when all the lefty YouTubers are these nice, foppish, queer characters, it doesn't really speak to that demographic of insecure white men. So I'm loud and aggressive, and I want to show people that you can be all these things without being part of the problem politically. But something happened during the pandemic. Notably, most people were stuck at home, indoors, and with a lot more free time on their hands. A recent large-scale survey revealed that worldwide, social media usage increased by an astonishing 20%. What is also noteworthy worthy to mention is that although social media usage has increased among all groups, irrespective of political affiliation or race, white liberals are the political affiliation and racial group to spend the most time on social media. They spend significantly more weekly hours on the internet, are significantly more likely to list the internet as their primary news source, and significantly more likely to consume news from and be politically active on social media. The pandemic, the precarity of lockdowns and the modern economy, as well as an audience significantly more politically active and aware online, were a perfect recipe for what was to come. What was to come and what came was audiences exhibiting a willingness to do what was previously unthinkable. In an age of TikTok, short-form content, blood sports, and garish BreadTube streamers, audiences were increasingly willing to sit through feature-length video essays. These essays broke down and applied popular critical academic theories to everyday life examples. And these essays overwhelmingly fall into three subgenres. Firstly, pop culture criticism, particularly analyzing and critiquing fashion trends, modern beauty standards, films, and popular shows. Secondly, race, particularly analyzing and critiquing racism, bias, and modern culture's effects on Black people. Sorry, I mean exclusively African Americans. And thirdly, transgenderism, particularly analyzing and critiquing transphobia, bias, and modern culture's effects on trans people. Contrary to Vorsch's assertions, nice, foppish queer characters were gradually garnering hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views and subscribers. They were and are still lauded as authorities on the subject matters they cover. Of course, these weren't just a girl sits in front of a camera talking video essays. These were full-length, well-edited theatrical masterpieces. They involved collaborations, skits, outfit changes, and set designs. The aesthetic and vibes were as important, if not more important, than the message. The theatrics were enticing and caused a stir, mainly because of how mysterious and idiosyncratic these essayists were. Viewers wanted to know everything about them. They wanted to read the books they read. They wanted to dress and talk the way these essayists dressed and talked. I mean, 2020 to 2021 was ContraPoint's most productive year. The pandemic saw BreadTube explode, transform, and rebrand almost overnight. And so I think it is necessary to distinguish between BreadTube then and BreadTube now.
I find functionally the most prominent left-leaning content creators aren't people who talk politics exclusively. They are people who will talk about culture issues, pop culture stuff, human interest topics, with a left-leaning spin. I always use this guy as an example, Curtis Connor. He's a TikToker, YouTuber, huge content creator, progressive bent to his videos, but he doesn't exclusively talk politics. In fact, he doesn't really talk politics, not directly. He won't talk about feminism. He'll talk about weird guys on TikTok being kind of weird about women, he won't talk about the incel movement. He'll talk about, what is with people in this dating advice, it's a way of delivering the idea, the message, without alienating people by directly codifying your politics. I think that's a very smart way of getting people introduced to your ideology.
What has happened since the pandemic is a growing divide between leftist streamers and leftist video essayists. When I refer to BreadTube in the rest of this video essay, I am going to be referring to the latter. Leftist video essayists and their social commentary allies, as well as what I like to call them tag-alongs. And I don't mean this derogatorily, I just mean it sort of analytically and as an easy term to refer to what are ultimately not necessarily like these social commentary channels, but are sort of like them. Just like JCS Criminal Psychology and Sunny V2 have their clones, leftist video essayists have their tag-alongs, who also largely emerged from and since around 2020. Clones emerge whenever particular kinds of content styles and types hit that sweet spot in the algorithm, and that is precisely what happened happened with BreadTube during the pandemic. That is BreadTube video essayists. Leftist streamers or debate bros are considered pariahs by BreadTube now, unless of course these debate bros are Hassan Piker, the streaming world's favorite champagne socialist. r/BreadTube has essentially shadow banned all debate bros. But what I've typically seen is BreadTube, that is video essayists, on a spectrum, ranging from hardcore purity testers to cliquey cloned social commenters moralizing about anyone who isn't in the group, to leftist feminists and intersectional feminists, all the way to what I have dubbed tagalongs. The only reason I talk about BreadTube's growing tagalongs is not to dog on them. Do what you need to do to make money, do what you need to do in order to get those views. I talk about them because they rarely expose something when it comes to BreadTube's descent from its pandemic era peak. In short, it is impossible to reconcile progressive historiography with BreadTube's clout, success, money-making, and branding fixation. And tagalongs are the most obvious example of this impossibility. Take, for example, Zoe Unlimited, a perfect example of a tagalong and the growing commercial value of being affiliated with BreadTuberism. Zoe has a history in social media marketing and, by her own admission, knows what sells. The evolution of her content is a perfect example of how influential these ideas are when it comes to not real-world change, but to career advancement. Roughly a year ago, Zoe switched up her content from diet vlogs and advice to what can be called woke video essays on modern beauty standards. Videos such as, "You're not ugly, you're just poor," all rely on arguments that are characteristically BreadTube. In August, Zoe, who at the time already had over 1 million subscribers on YouTube, received an investment of $1 million from a creator contest funded by investors like Logan Paul, Paris Hilton, and the Chainsmokers. The mission of the contest is to equip creators with whatever they need to grow successful businesses. Mind you, at the time, Zoe had over 1 million YouTube subscribers, thousands of dollars worth of brand sponsorships, a high-paying job in marketing, and hundreds of thousands of views monthly. Like Trolley Bolly says, it is difficult to argue against what can be seen as Zoe benefiting from both sides of the diet, beauty, and social justice conversations. And therefore, she is a good example of a content creator incorporating all the arguments and aesthetics of BreadTube into their brand and content. For instance, you can make a video about how toxic glow-up culture is, prefacing that although it can be good, there need to be good reasons behind it. Yet, a few months later, your reasons for promoting glowing up can be because you are going to Coachella. Zoe's video essays are all about modern society's allegiance to privilege and how wrong, detrimental, and unfair it is to especially her young female audience. Yet this is what Zoe said about the process that she went through to be awarded $1 million as a YouTuber with over 1 million subscribers at the time. I basically heard about the contest, and then on the last day to apply for it, I realized, oh, there are 12 hours left. I was like, I might as well. I made a short form video and then submitted that, and little did I know. That's privilege if ever I've heard it. And this isn't necessarily something bad in and of itself, but it is something that over time fails to add up to viewers who see you leading a life that works contrary to your message and branding. Zoe is that girl who she makes video essays against. She criticizes quiet luxury, whilst her brand and aesthetic are all about selling quiet luxury to her viewers. It's interesting that a scathing criticism of Zoe's content received more views than her reaction to it. I think this is indicative of viewers, especially Zoe's audience from 1 or 2 years years ago, not only growing up, but also recognizing contradictions in the arguments and actions. And this is something that is evident in other, more staunch BreadTubers' views when comparing them from 2 years ago to now. I only mention Zoe because she reminds me of what some of the original BreadTubers have become as a result of her brand strategy over the past year. I don't consider Zoe a true die-hard BreadTuber, but her audience's growing recognition of the message not aligning to the person's own actions and life is an endemic issue of BreadTube now. What is becoming increasingly apparent is that whilst BreadTubers criticize capitalism and even brand themselves as anti-capitalists, they are disproportionately benefiting from it. Take this example from a conversation, or more so a talking down to, I had with FD Signifier.
And I'm new to I'm a baby leftist. I think I don't know if that's understood. Like I started journeying left after Obama, and I probably learned more in the last 2 years of content creation, relevancy, I should say, than in those first 4 or 5 years of reading Marx and, you know, trying to understand things better, having certain conversations. So I'm a baby leftist, right? We've moved so far right, at least in the US. In the UK, there's different things, but we moved so far right in so many ways that, you know, there's been actual analyses of like Barack Obama's presidency to show that he was basically Ronald Reagan, like. I feel like I heard you say, like, you don't know if you're ever going to be able to save up to get a house, and that's a lot of people. Like I'm probably of the last section of millennials that comfortably bought a house, you know, and I only got my house because there was a recession and Obama was giving out, you know, loan stipends or whatever.
FD said that Obama's policies basically make Obama the equivalent of Ronald Reagan and are basically what made FD himself more extreme in his leftist politics. Yet an hour later, FD said that he was comfortably able to purchase a whole house because Obama was giving out loans. And this was initially when I started to think and realize that things in BreadTube were just not adding up anymore. Alongside sectarian rifts, a second discourse within the community concerns BreadTube's unbearable whiteness. Although BreadTube advocates for social, political, and economic equity, various members of the community have raised red flags about the marginalization of content creators of color in BreadTube spaces. For example, in her video, Why Is LeftTube So White?, Black BreadTube creator Kat Black described how interest in her work depends on valuations of it by white audiences. Acknowledging these points, a user commented on a r/BreadTube post titled, Where Are the Black BreadTubers? It's hard for me to go on YouTube and hear from all these intersectional people, and yet the tubers of color have maybe 10,000 subscribers at most. It's a huge disparity between the two. The subject of why BreadTube is so white has been covered heavily since Kat Black's heartfelt, very important video on the matter, especially as it personally pertains to her and other Black leftist YouTubers, social commentators, and video essayists on the platform. The reasons why I resonate so strongly with Kat's video essay has oddly evolved, especially since the beginning of this year. At the beginning of this year, I made a video in which I argued why the online left needed to do better in understanding the plight and the concerns of not only the people they claim to represent, political minorities, but also the people they need to realize their vision of a more inclusive world, the majority. People really seem to get where I was coming from, and not just conservatives or contrarians, but also liberals and leftists themselves, who felt that something wasn't quite right anymore on the online left. My video was doing quite well for the first few days, and then this happened.
Okay, now let me
some more transphobia. So let me just hold on. Let me real quick. So we're going to be getting, there's going to be a lot of transphobia and trans like antagonistic dog whistles, dog alarms, just so like as we continue, understand that is a huge undercurrent of this video, right? There's also going to be some anti-blackness. What else we got that's like trigger worthy?
Let's see.
General trigger warning for bigotry and shit. It's probably going to piss you to fuck off.
Yeah, general liberalism. Yeah.
General liberalism.
General liberalism. Gaslighting.
Right.
So this is the fundamental frustration I think I have with most of this whole video, right? And I'm glad that we got to it here because then we just talk about it. When you're trying to do things like not even necessarily like be an anti-fascist or do anti-fascism, right? When you're just trying to resist all of the various bigotries that there are, which I would argue is anti-fascism, but I just want to make sure there's a distinction between that specific thing and what I'm talking about. It requires you to oppose those things, right? It's not about like, oh, we need to hear them out. We need to hear them out. Like, no, like that ideology. I mean, you could argue that it's literally just fascism, but they overlap with fascists enough that the line is not them. Like, no, you don't polite fascism out of existence.
All right. It's not a debate.
Nah, you suppress that shit. You fight that.
I'm not. This video wasn't about trashing Kidology explicitly. Like, this is not kind to Kidology. She will not enjoy watching this video, and I'm not going to try to like gaslight into thinking that this was a nice thing to do, right? Or this is a kind thing to do. I've seen these types of videos about me, and mostly they're shitty. But like, I've seen my face on the screen, but me not there. It's not a fun experience. And so I want to send a empathy towards Kidology if and when she sees this, that it was not a malicious act to break down this video the way we did. It was because this video presents some very significant and important issues that we on the left do need to engage with. Not because, see, I've started laughing. I'm not gonna do that. Not because this was a challenging video argumentative wise, but because it illustrated the types of challenges that we need to get better at dealing with how far we are from just regular people who are still very much under hegemonic thought. And so of all the times I've did a reaction video, I was like, I gotta do this one, and it's gotta be out there for people to see, because we need to engage with why a person who considers himself a moderate would make a video like this that is inherently right-wing, you know, and then not realize how right-leaning it is in so many of his politics.
Interestingly, FD never uploads full streamed patron videos and live streams onto his second YouTube channel. But for some reason, he decided to do so just this one time. What is of further interest to me is that now, for research, when I look for this video, it has vanished. My channel was reported. I lost subscribers. I lost the majority of my income. And this was all a result of the things that FD said in his response to my video and directly to me. The views on my original video suddenly stopped entirely, and all the views went to his out of context reaction to particular statements I'd made. And so it was during this time, and as a consequence of the ramifications to what had happened, that my thinking on Cat Black's video began to evolve. I began to move from thinking, why is LeftTube so white, to why is CornbreadTube so white? Now, this may seem to be a complete juxtaposition, but do bear with me and let me explain in FD's own words.
The online left is overwhelmingly white, a petite bourgeois white community, in fact.
There is a black petit bourgeois community on YouTube. This petit bourgeois is comprised of members such as FD Signifier, Foreign Man in a Foreign Land, and other largely black content content creators, but not exclusively so. These are people who they personally condone and collaborate with. They determine who is truly black and who isn't, which, in their eyes, gives them the authority to use the exact same kind of derogatory, racist language that creates the very divisions they claim to want to overcome in the first place.
Let me tell you what I find frustrating about coons and their belief that they have that question to make. This is the problem with coonery and internalized anti-blackness and wanting to be in proximity of whiteness, right? And just wanting white approval and hating oneself, and it makes you blame your community for stuff that logically don't make sense.
Don't make no fucking sense.
That's not the latter in their mind. Because there's a difference deeply in the spirit of what is a token and what is a coon. Because I'm sure many of we learned Negroes have been the token in a room to black people, in a room full of white spaces. I'm sure we all have. Do not get me started. It was a gatekeeper. Yo, it was a gatekeeping black lady. Believe it or not, hey, the coon
always is.
Hey.
I'm essentially saying that just as white women will find ways to placate whiteness just for their proximity to it, will throw whatever womanhood, their femininity is second to their whiteness. In many ways, you have a lot of black people in the States, you will not find this of any surprise, where their blackness is secondary to their Americanness.
And you know what I find frustrating about that?
Clarence is one of them.
I just going to say, and that's coons. No, but the thing about a coon is where the resentment is. Every black person, Derek Bell talks about this in Faces at the Bottom of the Well, when he talks about rules of racial standing. Every single black person is presented with the opportunity to coon or legitimize anti-blackness by repeating white talking points. We all have it. What the coons' problem is not that they want to pull up the ladder because they don't perceive us as being on the same ladder. Their problem is that you're not playing the particular game.
I don't believe
they truly
that. I don't believe that.
themselves.
The functionality of it is absolutely the awareness that you have to shut that fucking door behind you for anybody else as a coon, as a token. That is the white supremacist functionality of tokenism, of cooning.
It depends on what position the coon token is in. And I'm gonna go with the coon over token because I think I agree with the fact that we've all say coon.
Not only is coon a racist slur, it is also described by the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia as follows. The coon caricature is one of the most insulting of all anti-black caricatures. The name itself, an abbreviation of raccoon, is dehumanizing. As with Sambo, the coon was portrayed as a lazy, easily frightened, chronically idle, inarticulate buffoon.
And many of these online leftists encounter leftist ideology first online through one of many video essayists or commentators, or in college, or both. Places and institutions that tend to exclude the most prominent black leftist thinkers from the space, and thus set the tone for what voices are welcome and which ones are not.
As my unfortunate dealings with FD Signifier demonstrate, CornbreadTube sets the tone for what voices are welcome and what voices are not. And in setting that tone, FD and friends don't check their own cliquey and black purist tendencies, and they definitely demonstrate their lack of knowledge of what blackness means to a diverse spectrum of people, cultures, experiences, and political interpretations, not just in the United States, but across the World Wide Web on which they work.
They never check their own racist tendencies and definitely lack knowledge of these black socialist movements, which these folks hold the power in the space.
FD and friends hold the power in this space in influencing the growth or otherwise of their friends. Take, for instance, Soul Bunny, an artist and video essayist whose video essays are not only openly anti-white and racist, but are just not good.
The only people that need to be doing bake sales and going door to door are other white people. I can keep this going all day, but let's get into this caucasity.
All of these white people, and even some Asian people, were basically accusing me of attacking this innocent white woman who was just appreciating the culture. White leftists are not our allies. They are not our accomplices. They are not for liberation. They are for their own profit and for building their own social capital and positioning themselves as the experts, as the This whole thing has just made me realize that like white people are not serious. It's because we have to keep explaining to white people that yes, white supremacy is actually at the root of everything. It's at the root of misogyny. It's at the root of queerphobia. It's at the root of transphobia. It's at the root of ableism. Sometimes it feels like white people are just like being dense on purpose. It's like their God-given right to be dense and to keep us trapped in this cycle of explaining to white people that white supremacy is at the root of everything. This is just like a facade to them. This is just a game. They have no like actual stakes in the game.
Thankfully, however, Soul Bunny's reputation precedes the quality of her essays. The nonsensical, racially bigoted arguments that she perpetually makes in order to justify her own shortcomings as a video essayist are fortunately offset by her friendships with FD and other BreadTubers such as Jessie Gender and Zoe B. And the thing is, people have noticed and are disappointed that very good, thorough video essays are compromising their high standards in the interest of what is condoned by the black petty bourgeoisie. In the same way that Cap Black says that, quote, more people are willing to give her work a chance if a white person says that it's okay or not. CornbreadTube has done the exact same thing when it comes to black content creators in the genres of social commentary and video essays. My channel was impacted by FD's disproportionate response to my video because it wasn't the right kind of black for him. And of course, CornbreadTube does something which increasingly people online are getting tired of, claiming or insinuating that any valid criticism directed to them is either simply racism or bigotry. Take the fascinating example of how CornbreadTube does thumbnails or video titles. Weird, I know, yet also one of the most subtle yet simultaneously audacious ways in which valid criticism is conveniently put onto modern day's most convenient scapegoat, white people, or rather the essentialist caricature of a white person that is all over CornbreadTube. This was FD Signifier's original thumbnail and title for his video essay about why leftist drama is so bad, in a video that was pure drama. The title has gone through several evolutions. It was originally called Broke Bread, LeftTube has a drama problem. Then it was I might have a drama problem. Now it's leftist infighting almost killed me, Broke Bread. Just a spoiler alert, leftist infighting and drama didn't almost kill him. He didn't have a stroke. He suffered from immense stress and a terrible migraine and panic attack. I am not downplaying the seriousness of this, and I wish him nothing but the greatest health moving forward. However, it is starkly different to almost being killed. Note as well the symbolism of the original artwork. FD, an innocent black content creator and victim, dragged and manipulated into drama by all these pesky white people wanting a piece of him. This was Foreign Man in a Foreign Land's original thumbnail and title on a video in which he disingenuously goes after the internet's largest transgender streamer Keffals. In this case, he went after her for being in rehab.
You see, I knew the strong with him as soon as he said blocks. I'm not surprised that he said. I'm not surprised.
After backlash which in my opinion would not have been the case this time last year, which shows you how things are starting to change and how people are starting to put two and two together. He quietly changed the title and thumbnail after it wouldn't disrupt the algorithm too much. Of course, when enough time passed and the video became old news, he changed it right back. Now, there was something which I noticed in my weeks-long analysis and deep dive into the content of the black petty bourgeoisie. The people they critique and outright despise the most are the very same people who they have the most in common with: radical, guilt-ridden white liberals. On the other hand, the people they claim, and I think, genuinely believe themselves to be representing and to stand hand in hand with, with are the very people they have the least in common with. That is, the average black voter, the average person of color who is typically very religious, socially conservative, especially in values surrounding sexuality, immigration, and policing. Why I say that CornbreadTube is so white is because, well, they are. These particular cornbread tubers dislike white liberals as much as white liberals dislike themselves. These cornbread tubers, like their white liberal counterparts, espouse attitudes and policy preferences that are largely unrepresentative of the marginalized communities whose will they claim to represent. They espouse the same luxury beliefs as their white liberal counterparts. They advocate for the same social and gender identity issues as their white liberal counterparts. Even though black and Asian Democrats and liberals are, for instance, greatly more supportive of restrictive immigration policies and are more likely to be pro-Israel than pro-Palestine. I'll return to this in more depth in my chapter on luxury beliefs, a term coined by psychologist Rob Henderson to describe the growing status symbol of beliefs that confer social status on bourgeois folks like FD and friends, or radical white liberals from affluence, whilst ironically, the costs of these luxury beliefs are inflicted on and are borne by the lower classes.
I got kids to feed! We got kids to feed! Man. What the are they doing? Nothing! Get the out of here! What's wrong with y'all?
Y'all couldn't find a better way to protest it. Get out here.
Y'all need to go my kids who put I gotta go to work and somebody do anything.
As I demonstrated by my own personal example of having my career shaken by FD's power to determine who is welcome and who isn't in the online black community, other black outliers and I have routinely had our work, our opinions, and our experiences not only excluded, but ridiculed. We are called Candace Owens, or self-hating coons, Uncle Toms, and traitors who aren't actually black. This racist language and these derogatory insinuations are openly used by the leader himself. And it's important that these cornbread tubers make it known to their audiences that we outliers are not like them. Because if people realize that there are a multitude of other ways of existing as a black person in this world, for instance, as a black person who doesn't constantly resort to blaming everybody else, grand narratives, and systemic issues for the state of our existence at every possible opportunity, what would the point of their content be? What would the point of videos like Fuck the Police serve if black people who support the institution of policing were given a thumbs up by cornbread tubers? The narcissism of small differences is perfectly exemplified by this black petty bourgeoisie. The term narcissism of minor differences was coined by Sigmund Freud to refer to a psychoanalytical phenomenon. He initially used it to refer to behaviors he observed in individuals, but would later use it to refer to groups. It is always possible to bind together a considerable number of people in love, so long as there are other people left over to receive the manifestations of their aggressiveness. I once discussed the phenomenon that it is precisely communities with adjoining territories and related to each other in other ways as well, who are engaged in constant feuds and in ridiculing each other, Germans and South Germans, the English and the Scotch, and so on. I gave this phenomenon the name of the narcissism of minor differences, a name which does not do much to explain it. We can now see that it is a convenient and relatively harmless satisfaction of the inclination to aggression, by means of which cohesion between the members of the community is made easier. In this respect, the Jewish people, scattered everywhere, have rendered most useful services to the civilizations of the countries that have been their hosts. Mind you, Freud said this before the Shoah. As identity politics has replaced all politics, the idea that the narcissisms of small differences is harmless can be easily disproved, especially since the post-Cold War era. The phenomenon applies to the intra-group conflicts that BreadTube increasingly has fallen victim to. Basically, the more commonalities a group or community share, the more susceptible members are to, quote, engage in interpersonal interpersonal feuds and mutual ridicule because of hypersensitivity to minor differences perceived in each other, rather than appreciating and building off from similarities in ideology, politics, and policy, which BreadTube share with other content creators and bodies of people. Increasingly, minor differences of realistically no consequence are fixated on. They are used time and time again to justify why allyship or compromise or understanding of the other side just won't work. And this has ensued into the quality of BreadTube essays declining as subject matter becomes gripped by the narcissism of small differences. What's noticeable is that CornbreadTube video essays have become more isolationist in nature, the subject matter being overwhelmingly about a small difference and niche aspect of identity that preaches to the already converted. As such, the world which is the enemy will never change or listen, and therefore the video essayist is always needed to explain why the audience is oppressed and will remain oppressed.
All this content is a waste of time if you're looking to achieve political goals and political ends, okay? Broadly speaking, the best thing you can do if you want to do something is to get the fuck out there and do something about it, okay? Go and join an org. Go and fucking organise. Go and join a political party. Whatever it is you want to do, go and do it, okay? All this is bullshit. It doesn't change anything. It's all just content to be consumed. Always, always, always has been. Always will be. That's not going to change, okay? I've been saying this for fucking years now, okay? And for some reason, people still seem to be under the impression that sat there watching content creators is how you make change in the world. But it just isn't. You're just consuming content. That's what you're doing. These platforms are geared up for that to be the case. Look at the way that YouTube works. It's literally fucking designed from the bottom up now to just have you sit there and watch video after video after video, consuming. It works in opposition to actually going out and doing something. And I think it's great that people do that. I've got no interest in it. My goal is to make as much content as I can and make money and, whatever, right? For me, it's a pointless endeavor to do anything beyond just make content out of this. And I think these kinds of people that do this content are fooling themselves if they think they're doing anything but creating content to be consumed, okay?
There are actual issues of racism and racial discrimination, which BreadTube largely ignores. I would argue that this is because of an inherent class issue within BreadTube and CornbreadTube. The luxury beliefs of BreadTube mean that an endemic issue such as child labor and its direct links to racial discrimination are never spoken about. This is something which affects the poorest of the poor in the United States. That is, the poorest Black people and the poorest Latin Americans. These poor people are not, however, BreadTube, and their core audiences, who are relatively well off, have the time to watch their lengthy video essays and to donate monthly to their Patreons. It is becoming increasingly clear that their sphere of interest in overcoming or dismantling structures of oppression revolve around luxury beliefs and microaggressions online. Something like child labor is only ever considered as a side note in relation to, for instance, fast fashion. Ironic considering poor people are the main buyers and employees of the fast fashion industry because it's affordable and puts food on the table. But I digress. When it comes to BreadTube video essays, things such as child labor are never seen as a bad thing in and of themselves, unless they are connected to some kind of luxurious thing. Although there is nothing at all wrong with being well off enough that you don't have to think about the poor in your day-to-day life. From the moral compass of BreadTube, this is something which everybody else who isn't them ought to be thinking about and dismantling. However, they themselves don't and won't because luxury beliefs, because class reductionism, another inductive argument that has resulted in the modern online left abandoning the traditional left and poor people in favor of the comforting armchair theorizing that is offered by contemporary identity politics. It's incredibly hurtful to know that when I share my experiences, when I ask my questions, when I've been in in communication with CornbreadTube. It has never been enough because myself and others like me are just not black enough. When I say that I'm not transphobic, people don't believe me because people like FD Signifier, a member of the black petty bourgeoisie, or people like Tara Mooney, a radical white leftist / liberal, claim that I'm transphobic. It was only after FD responded to my video that people started to call me a transphobe. Their opinion and their beliefs of who I am, including FD's audience's own rather horrid psychoanalysis of me, is given more credibility and is more important than my own opinion of me. To me, this was so akin to what Kat Black said about people not believing her over her white BreadTube peers. I mean, FD accused me of dog whistling to the right wing and of being transphobic, yet he refuses to get into a conversation as to why that is, nor to do the work that he is meant to be doing because, well, that's his job. That is, informing and communicating with those who want to know why they should side with him in the first place. His idea of informing a person he labels a transphobe is to send an email link to an article. Literally, that was the entire email. In our entire email correspondence, he made it clear that he just didn't really want to talk to me, that this was an inconvenience to him. He ghosted me after, mind you, initiating communication with me in the first place. And yet, in all of this, I'm meant to be on his side. In all of this, normies and the majority are meant to be on his side. I'm meant to humanize him and humanize his cause and those who he represents, whilst he refuses to humanize me and others like me. I mean, we're just coons. And I believe that this is another reason why people are not so readily or eagerly engaging with BreadTube anymore. You can't fight racism with racism. You can't expect people to like you when you are so purposefully unlikable. I guess in conclusion, we can say that the Zan theorem was correct.
Is left-wing YouTube dying? Is BreadTube, as they say, dying? And is the online right, as Turkey Tom goes on to say, going to see a resurgence? Are we going to see just a big jump in right-wing content, right-wing popularity online, and is BreadTube going to die? I think yes. I am fully convinced yes, and I'm going to explain why. I'm starting to see the online left turn into what it was back during the Gamergate era. I'm genuinely starting to see the online left turn into what it was back then. Back in the day, one of the biggest common talking points from the right during this era was the left was too afraid to debate and defend their positions. That's why Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro blew up so much. It's because they debated, and they didn't debate well, and they weren't telling the truth. They just debated. Just the fact they were willing to debate gave them more credibility than the left, because nobody on the left wanted to debate. The left at the time were high and mighty, BuzzFeed videos, feminist like video essay content, and like woke scoldy, high and mighty, preachy, non-funny, non-edgy, milquetoast, sugar sweet, fucking condescending left-wing content made by, well, trans people with pink hair, okay, and blue hair, which obviously isn't a problem in and of itself, but it does kind of make the left, it makes gives right-wingers, makes them mad. But I'm more so talking about the attitude, not like the optics of who's advocating for what, right? I am seeing a worrying growth in the current largest left-wing figures on this platform proudly exclaiming how anti-debate they are and how anti-defending your ideas they are and how anti-good optics they are, basically. I'm really worried that we're going to start to see a repeat of 2014 to 2016, not just in the rise of the anti-SJW community, but the left-wing community is going to look a lot like it did back then, too. I genuinely think the combination of, like, crazy TikTok lefty teens and like the fear-mongering around cancel culture, critical race theory, and the Capitol riot, and anti-vax shit, and Kyle Rittenhouse, and crypto, and fucking all this shit. I think all of this fucking shit is going to lead to not only the right going back to where it was back in the Gamergate days, but the left going back there too.
Believe it or not, but contemporary capitalism has actually served BreadTube's thought leaders incredibly well. Similarly to the business of anti-racism, the business of being anti-capitalism is only growing in value, and nothing gives the venture more ethical credibility than BreadTube's moral arbiters, who partake in the very business model and profit-making activities that they demonize others for. It is not hypocritical to critique capitalism while partaking in it, reads a disclaimer on Fab Socialism's YouTube channel. In fact, we are critiquing capitalism largely because we are forced to partake in it in order to survive. But is this declaration actually true? Are we actually forced to partake in capitalism to survive as a need? This is categorically false, based on the same logic that these creators use. Because whilst they demand radical change from everybody else, they are proving themselves unwilling to lead by radical example. The impracticality of their remedies is exhibited perfectly by their own activities, which reflects a disconnect between, on the one hand, their impractical and radical solutions, and on the other hand, their moderate, all too human, everyday decision making. They decide to consume non-essential products and services. They decide to live conveniently and comfortably rather than radically and uncomfortably. Their extraordinary morals don't align with the oppressive systems they critique in their video essays. But importantly, their oh so ordinary actions and everyday activities most definitely do. They don't, for instance, join communes, start communes, live off the grid or in a kibbutz, nor relocate to a less capitalist society like Laos, Cuba, or Vietnam. And you may say that those things are impractical, that those things are very radical. And I would answer, yes, it is radical. And that is precisely the point, surely.
The reason why people don't like it when you say you can work within the system is because that means that you have the capability to make change, which means that if change isn't happening, you have the responsibility or some shared responsibility for why the world is the way that it is. Nobody likes that. Whether you're talking about far-right people that blame, the Jews or whatever, or you're talking about far-left people that blame capitalism, there's a very nice and comforting feeling in knowing that the world is eternally fucked, and it's because of powers that are way larger and way less dealable than anything else that you could ever imagine in life. There's always going to be a big guy pulling the strings behind the curtain. You can never do anything about it. It's always too much. I think that's one of the reasons why those theories are so attractive, because there's so much you can externalize in terms of blame about the world. The idea that people say to work within the system because they're privileged, bullshit. People that want to work outside of the system are the privileged ones. You're never going to go into some poor black neighborhood and hear them talking about fucking mutual aid or fucking trans GoFundMes on fucking Twitter. This is some shit that is exclusive to wealthy white people on the internet and will almost always be the case, because these alternative fucking anarcho whatever projects never do anything more than satiate the desires of well-intended but ultimately uneducated white people on the internet that want to feel like they're saving the world.
And I think this is increasingly showing how BreadTube finds itself in a bind. This year, I have been seeing audiences more readily calling out their BreadTube faves for often talking about an anti-capitalist or anti-liberal topic in a video that is, ironically, sponsored by a capitalist liberal brand or company. Sponsorship opportunities come with growth and success. As the success of thought leaders has increased, I've noticed that they respond in one of two ways. Either they double down on their anti-capitalist rhetoric, using moral relativism or their intersectional identities to their advantage, or they very subtly and over a period of time soften their anti-capitalist rhetoric, becoming less radical and more socially democratic, or more about sort of changing the system from within gradually and with a bit more understanding. I would say that the latter is a response that I have been seeing more and more so with BreadTube video essayists, especially as of late. Maybe it's the hindsight of age, but in my personal opinion and just based on my research, I think it has more to do with the fact that, at least of this year, more and more BreadTubers have signed on with talent management teams and with management teams.
I made a video about porn and how I've taken it down.
I was gonna say,
I've taken all these videos down because they were just like commentary. But I basically made a video about young female porn stars getting exploited by the Miami amateur porn industry.
So how was that for monetization?
Oh god, got demonetized. Probably got about
was it age
500
restricted?
views. Age restricted, demonetized. And the thing is that with demonetization, I don't actually care about the money all that much. It's the fact that because YouTube aren't making money out of it, they don't put out the video.
No.
So like that, that video I made a couple of months ago, it was about kink and rough sex. That got demonetized. And not gonna lie, banging video. It was actually pretty good.
Yeah,
and it got like 100. I think it's on like 150,000 views, which isn't. Well, I'm happy with that. But like, if it had got monetized, it would have done a lot better.
Yes.
But
and it's a
anyways.
bummer because it's about the education. You
Yeah,
say, it's not about the money. It's about the education.
Yeah, exactly. Like I want young boys to see that as much as young girls, because I feel like young boys can really be the instigators when it comes to stuff like that. Yeah, see, the thing is that I had like I'd probably say it was 4 months of doing like really explicitly political videos, and unfortunately it was really extremely time consuming. It was extremely difficult, and also I hate to use terms like I wasn't really intelligent enough for it, but I don't think I really had the capacity to do it, like, if I'm gonna be honest. And I was making a lot less money, and obviously like YouTube is my job, so I then decided to veer back off into video essays, and my audience were preferring it, and it was easier to make these videos. I could make them more frequently, I could make more money, and
there just seems to be this expectation that our role is to change minds, and obviously that is a really important part of it, but a lot of it is being on the ground. And you were talking about this actually in your follow-up. There's or was it a question that was asked, basically saying that I don't know if a lot of online leftists do enough groundwork and like actual, I don't know how you describe it, and I would definitely say that's a thing I would want to be more active in, encouraging people to actually do stuff as opposed to just trying to convert people, basically. Do you listen to a podcast called Behind the Bastards? Have you heard of it?
I haven't, no.
Oh, it's great. I'll send you it. It's so
Cool.
good. It's what it sounds like. It goes into the worst people in the world and just talks about them. It's great. And someone was saying on a subreddit that they were really inspired by an episode, and it was all about how, obviously US medicine, it's all for profit and that kind of thing, and how it's like just destroyed people with diabetes, and how the whole insulin for profit industry and that kind of stuff. And this person said that episode inspired me to work like it for an organization that brings insulin to people that can't afford it and stuff. And I'm like, see that, that you know what I mean? Like, I think that would be the goal for my work going forward, to inspire people to make changes in their life and just in the way they think, and hopefully make them want to do stuff that could change things. It would be amazing. That's kind of the goal, I think. Maybe this is controversial. My dream is to no longer be associated with the term BreadTube.
Really?
I hate the term.
Really?
Yeah, it's just so, it's not, I feel like it's not really about politics per se. It's about who you're associated with, because we've talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who make way more explicitly political content than I do, but aren't considered breadtubers, and I think it's like an elitism thing.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, it's just so much pressure, because this is the thing, if you want to venture out, so I want to make like silly goofy stuff sometimes, and because people might associate with me with the BreadTube label, they sort of go, "Ooh, what's this? Wait, this isn't meaningful. Like, why aren't you, activism, praxis?" And I'm like, here's a newsflash: YouTube videos are not praxis. I don't know what to tell you, but like, I am not an activist.
I can't help but see the digitalized decadence of PhilosophyTube and ContraPoints as being blueprints for other breadtubers to aspire toward. Yet, at the same time, such aspirations and rewards of obvious wealth, opportunity, and, that most doomed word, privilege, make not only arguments go around in circles, but additionally lead to unresolvable real-world contradictions. Fortunately, BreadTube has found the virtual world very effective in offsetting what historically would have been considered plain and simple envy and resentment. ContraPoints won't, thank God, face beheading, but instead come face to face with the bitterness of Twitter. Virtuality has made it possible for the online anti-capitalist left to cry, "Eat the rich," whilst her son Piker drives his Porsche and Second Thought does a series on Nebula reviewing supercars.
Excuse us, don't mind us, just coming through.
Just coming through in a $160,000 car. It's more expensive than most houses are.
It's wild. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Exploitation and environmental destruction and doing just about anything for a buck is the name of the game under capitalism. And that's what we take issue with. Not that Jeff specifically is the one doing it. This doesn't stop what these billionaires are doing from being wrong. But most of it is just perfectly legal. And all we'd want to do is change that to put an end to it, not to punish people. Just make the awful stuff stop.
The internet has not only made it possible to be a breadtuber, it has also made it possible to be an astonishingly wealthy capitalistic one without contradiction. And there isn't that cathartic release in confronting the rich, nor the mutual humanizing of the resentful and the resented. And in my personal capitalistic opinion, that's actually a very good thing. But I can't help notice that whilst BreadTube's thought leaders are getting richer and richer, leftist violence is becoming a greater possibility. It is also increasingly being called for or justified by these thought leaders.
In his book titled Parasites, French sociologist Nicolas Framont turned trickle-down economics upside down by showing that the upper classes of society actually cost us a lot of money and don't pay a lot of taxes in return in comparison to working classes and middle classes. They are the real parasites. So Framont says it's urgent that we recreate a strong class consciousness, that we continue to use terms like the rich, the bourgeois, the parasite class, that we point a finger at them to materialize their existence. But he also recommends that we go beyond class consciousness to create class trust, so that we stop seeing the ultra-rich as gurus and reject our own class identity in the process. The ultra-rich don't add much value to society. They accumulate money that they spend in ways that mostly benefit those already on top. Also, they are simply not compatible with the society we must create to save our planet. They are the parasite class. And what do we do to annoying parasites?
Nothing has demonstrated this more starkly than the online left's, including BreadTube's, response to the Israeli-Palestinian war. To summarize, BreadTube video essayists Second Thought, Hakim, and Yugupnik call the brutality that happened to Israeli civilians and children earlier this month based, describing them, that is, fathers, mothers, and children, as colonizers.
Tell us, Hakim, you're the closest. Tell us, what the fuck is going on?
Very base things, but TLDR to preempt all the questions. This has two major benefits. Number one, it's kind of to throw a wrench in the normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is a very good thing. And number two is also to gain concessions in the forms of prisoner swaps, because there's a lot of people who are imprisoned illegally by the Zionist forces, and all these people that the armed groups within Palestine have managed to capture, these people will be eventually sent back to Israel in return for freeing at least some number.
And just to give you a perspective on how valuable a single prisoner is, the last time there was a prisoner exchange, they exchanged one Israeli prisoner for like 1,027 Palestinian prisoners,
Yeah.
I believe, something like that. So if you've got now, 50 to bargain with, that's huge.
He's actually take civilian hostage, or is that fake news? I don't care.
Yeah, the occupiers
I don't-
are
I do-
not civilians. That is what it comes down to. Like if
French-
if
Sorry, go on.
Germany, let's say Germany to be non-controversial, invaded the United States, and they said, you know what, Cincinnati, Ohio is our ancestral home, and everyone knows that's blatantly false. But they take your home, they murder your grandma, they bulldoze like your neighbor's house. Are those people civilians there? No, they're occupiers, and those are criminals. That is, there are no civilians there in the illegal military occupation.
Yeah. So that's number one, very beautifully put.
And this is also another thing that I've noticed people increasingly getting tired of. That is BreadTube video essayists increasingly conflating whiteness with colonizer. Bread, that is money, has always been at the forefront of political violence and justifying it. So why am I talking about BreadTube's money? Well, in all honesty, we need to talk about money. And it has always fascinated me how taboo discussions of money, sponsorships and deals are among breadtubers, when this kind of thing should be at the core of their discourse based on their foundational politics. The fascination with what people earn isn't so much about envy. I'm a capitalist, go and make your dough. In as much as it is about being able to better understand and circumnavigate our own circumstances and worth. When it comes to the systemic issues breadtubers constantly fixate on in their video essays, finances are the ultimate systemic institution. How are we meant to accurately address the racial pay gap or the gender pay gap if we can't and don't openly talk about our finances and what we earn? It was only when I, for instance, in the last few months got a manager that I came to realize how much money these breadtubers are actually making from their deals and sponsorships. Imagine how much money anti-capitalist video essayist Elise is making from her year-long sponsorship deal with Squarespace.
This video is sponsored by Squarespace, because today's video is sponsored by Squarespace, and I'm going to talk about voluntary singlehood. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Before I do that, I need to introduce you to today's sponsor, Squarespace. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Before I leave, I'd like to talk to you about today's sponsor, Squarespace. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Slow living isn't a lifestyle choice, but an incentive, a right, or even a social project. But before we continue, I'd like to introduce you to today's sponsor, Squarespace. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Bonjour! Now, before I leave, I need to talk to you about today's sponsor, Squarespace.
Good for her. Truly. But also, you're not an anti-capitalist. In a video about how parasitic capitalists are, Elise said the following.
And to be fair, only a few career paths can allow for that to happen, and they are not known for being the most ethical. The goal isn't to work hard, but to work smart. And by smart, they mean making the most profit with the least amount of effort. For example, working smart means dropshipping, it means creating and monetizing content about finance and how to get rich, it means selling books and courses or creating hustler universities.
Interestingly, the video is sponsored by Squarespace, a website that encourages entrepreneurship, hustle culture, and creating forms of passive income. Her audience were ready to address the irony of the situation, which she readily dismissed because she has to pay her team and thus has to outsource her labor to other people.
So Repeater is publishing my book that I'm working on at the moment, and so they kindly sent me a bunch of books. Tarek is my editor. He's gonna read my book.
The creative economy isn't like the generic service economy. Not only is it new, but it is also highly unregulated. It is also so incredibly mysterious that it is difficult to understand for anybody who hasn't been in it for a long period of time, myself included. And yet, BreadTube has no interest in dissecting it or radically dismantling it. Instead, they have shown themselves to be the main beneficiaries of it, which, and I repeat, there is nothing inherently wrong with. But according to their branding, their moralizing, and their radicalism, this ought to be a major problem. So why isn't it? When I think about why BreadTube has become staler, I can't help but attributing some of it to the fact that they are members of what I like to call the eWorking class. The eWorking class are individuals who espouse two things. Their online persona runs adjacent to critical theories, social awareness, and anti-capitalism. Yet, their real-world selves are anything but. Now, the issue that I have with the e-working class is that they build their credibility, their brand, and their brand value via values and prescriptions that they tell their audience to adopt, whilst not doing so themselves. Audiences believe that the morals, the messages, and the prescriptions which they are told by these video essayists are possible offline and in real life. That it is possible to build a radically better world because said video essayist said so. Let's elaborate with an example. This year, Mina signed with IMG Models, an international modeling agency that has signed such names as Gigi Hadid, Bella Hadid, Cara Delevingne, Kendall Jenner, Lily Cole, Hailey Bieber, and Maddie Ziegler. She is also signed with William Morris Endeavour, or Endeavour Group Holdings Inc., a holding company that also represents the NFL and NHL. It also owns the Ultimate Fighting Championship and successfully purchased and merged with the WWE in September. Basically, it is the perfect example of a perfect monopoly owned by old white men. Yet in Mina's videos, one is routinely met by these arguments and claims.
Woke washing, similar to greenwashing and pinkwashing, is a type of performative capitalism. Companies these days often brand themselves as being woke, either by posting like a Black Lives Matter post on Instagram or by showing a diverse range of models in their ad campaigns, because they know being more progressive is monetizable these days. Like, that's what people expect from the companies they buy from. A certain level of political awareness. But the reason this is all performative is because 99% of the time, what the values these companies are championing on the surface level are not being reflected in the company's internal structure. And on top of that, these companies do not address the systemic issues that cause us to feel less confident to begin with. Because even when you're getting jobs like as a model, and this is just like what I've noticed with a lot of kind of like freelancer-y jobs, you don't get paid until much later after you do the job. A lot of the times you don't get paid for 30 days. A lot of the times you don't get paid until 90 days after. So for you to be able to float along between those pay periods, it requires you to have a pretty comfortable balance in your bank account beforehand, which means not living paycheck to paycheck. And you know, just like beyond all those logistics, since like aspirational modeling boomed in the 1980s, it's just more profitable for brands to work with well-known people, with celebrities, with influencers, than it is for them to work with just like a random model who's good at her job. Because brands know that if they're working with a celebrity or an influencer, that person has a large following. So it's also like not just using this person's image, it's getting their followers to buy products too. There's multiple advantages than just having like a really sick ad campaign. And also, if like your mom is a model or a celebrity and you're like an 18-year-old who's just like starting to come out into this industry, there's a lot of press that is driven towards you because people are like, oh, is she gonna live up to her mom's name? There's more interest in following you, and brands know that. So they're gonna go for Kaya Gerber rather than like some girl from Ohio.
Mina's video essays are a brilliant instance of what can be called luxury beliefs. And luxury beliefs are riddled in the video essays of BreadTube's thought leaders. An easy example of a luxury belief is being anti-capitalist, for instance. Anti-capitalists, both online and offline, are ironically often only so in their beliefs and not in their lifestyles or praxis. What is interesting about these luxury beliefs, especially among BreadTube video essays, is that having the belief is oftentimes more influential, confers more status and power than does actually being an anti-capitalist in action. Mina Lee's vintage fashion aesthetic and repertoire is a good example of the increasing value our culture places on luxury beliefs over luxury things. This can be seen from a quote in her recent feature in Vogue magazine: "Vintage style, not vintage values." It is possible, as a modern online breadtuber, to engage in a life of luxury and to appreciate the style of luxury, so long as one doesn't espouse the beliefs and the values of luxury. So it's fine to be a rich capitalist, so long as you're an anti-capitalist in your outwardly expressed value system, because that is where the status is. How that line is drawn and not crossed or crossed, nobody really knows. And it largely seems to be at the discretion of the leftist video essayist. But I personally think that the internet has a great deal to do with this. Breadtubers are online personalities, and because of that, their aesthetic and their brand is ultimately who they are to their viewers. Their embodied selves who exist in the real world, who go to exclusive elitist fashion shows and get sponsored by Dior, are difficult to reconcile. Mina Lee did a collaboration and sponsorship with luxury fashion house Dior this time last year. As you can see, the video didn't do nearly as well as her other videos, and some viewers weren't happy. Personally, I think it is disappointing to see you supporting these industries that you very much know have for decades profited and encouraged misogyny, racism, fatphobia, and slavery. You know better than this. So Mina Lee is now a shill for Dior and its owner, Bernard Arnault. Congratulations. Would have been more impactful had she worked in collaboration with any independent fashion designer from anywhere around the world. But no, let's put on some rose-tinted glasses, boost Dior, and watch Mina Lee sell out. Based on my personal analysis of the eWorking class, the eWorking class pick and choose what they want from capitalism, similarly to how the likes of Mina Lee pick and choose what they want from vintage fashion, from decadent living, and the contradictory messages they put out in condoning it, whilst also saying, as Mina says, that, quote, fashion has always been political, and therefore criticizing the core facets of it. Just a few months before Mina Lee's collaboration with Dior in Paris, Dior was involved in a scandal which continues to this day. Dior was accused of culturally appropriating traditional and historic Chinese clothing. The controversy began earlier this month, with Chinese netizens and state media outlets accusing the brand of failing to acknowledge the alleged inspiration behind its design. A recent editorial in the Communist Party's official mouthpiece, People's Daily, said that Dior had shamelessly misrepresented the skirt as an original creation, describing social media outrage as completely understandable. Indignation then spilled out onto the streets of Paris last Saturday, when a small group of demonstrators gathered outside one of the brand's boutiques. Images and videos shared online show protesters holding signs written in a mixture of French and English, with messages including "Dior, stop cultural appropriation," and "This is a traditional Chinese dress." My point here is to show that BreadTube money and credibility is made explicitly from the very things that they criticize others for promoting and condoning. They criticize white, cis-heteronormative men and Western body standards, while signing deals with these white, cis-heteronormative men and their monopolizing media empires. They criticize things such as cultural appropriation, whilst endorsing brands that culturally appropriate.
So I feel like there's a lot of articles and videos on the internet talking about the crimes of fast fashion. Yes, it's environmentally damaging. Yes, it's very unethical because workers are working in Victorian era factory conditions. And a lot of the time, these companies steal ideas and designs. But it goes to show that unless a brand is called out for doing something wrong, they will do whatever they want behind closed doors, all while pushing for these wonderful and amazing progressive values on the surface.
The issue issue I and many of their viewers have with these creators is not so much with what they do or are doing, but with how they are doing it. There's an inherent mismatch in their road to success and the road in which they are telling their audiences to go down. In short, luxury beliefs help nobody except those who are benefiting from those beliefs in the form of luxury and profit. BreadTube video essayists are no exception to this. And what is clear is that their audiences are starting to take note, for good reason. The demographic reality for minorities in America is that you can only really get so big by talking exclusively to your people. At some point, the market proof of your ambitions speaks more loudly than whatever it is that you're actually saying. And that is precisely what I think has happened to the BreadTube video essay genre, to BreadTube's social commentary and tag-alongs. Mass media platforms like YouTube cannot produce or foster anything truly revolutionary or earth-shatteringly original. The only thing that can rarely be done is merely serving the vanity or the expectations of viewers already predisposed to agreeing with their moralizing BreadTube faves. And what I have seen happen is that people who are human, who make mistakes, who are flawed, who are very open about such things, get called fence sitters or individuals who do both siderism, people who are flaky and ultimately don't really have any true moral standing. I hope that this video has shown that these BreadTube video essayists are as human as the both siderisms, as the individuals who are a bit more flaky, as the individuals who these people have made content, very profitable content, against for a number of years now. I feel that video essayism has really been tainted by this idea, this dominating idea that is fostered by the most powerful, the most influential, the biggest video essayists on this platform, which is that somehow their way of doing things, which pertains to using the same kinds of slurs, the same racism and racist innuendos, is somehow good because it's woke or because they are doing it in the service of some form of social justice. Their bullying is seen as somehow justifiable, and their fan base and their supporters and community justify it, and nobody ever speaks out against them. I think personally, due to fear of how powerful they are. I know my comment section for this video is going to be full of some very horrible comments, but I think that for the good of good video essayism, for the good of fostering a good as opposed to that all overly used word toxic environment on YouTube, a toxic environment when it comes to the internet, it is important that we talk freely about how we feel about things, that we talk freely and openly without being scared. I can tell you I have been petrified to talk about, especially the section in this video that I actually do have a personal investment in, the section on CornbreadTube, because I am fucking scared of those people and of their communities. I am kid you not. But something I've realized is that they do depend on that fear. They depend on people being scared that if they talk out, something bad will happen. There was obviously that important, subtle message in FD's correspondence with me, that me saying these things, that me saying the things that I said in my previous video had to be put back into place. I had to be put back into my place, into what is actually, in their opinion, true blackness, truly being a black woman. A very interesting tactic indeed, but one that I am seeing increasingly in this community. Social commentary and video essays are brilliant, phenomenal genres. It is a phenomenal thing to do, but I think increasingly and regrettably, too much of what I have detailed in this video is happening, and nobody is talking about it, mainly because I would hazard people are quite frightened of the influence and of the community penalties and backlash that they will get from saying such things about creators, from saying such things about this platform and the genre. And I think what has been helpful for me is seeing how some BreadTubers, some video essayists are responding to the community and the culture by distancing themselves, by quote-unquote leaving BreadTube, by going through a humanization process, which at least 2 years ago, they very much distinguished themselves from.
But it can't be good to be sad and angry all the time. I refuse to believe that. And frankly, I refuse to live like that. And that's one of the problems with this evolution of American politics, is that politics is kind of expected to be your life, even if you aren't a content creator. Like, it's good that people are more politically engaged and aware of systemic issues that nobody seemed to talk about before. But I think we've overcorrected for that. Now, every aspect of your existence is expected to be filtered through the lens of politics. You know, a popular brand worked with a trans person. Well, you gotta boycott that brand, obviously. Did your parents vote for Donald Trump? Well, I guess you should stop talking to them forever. I'm not trying to do a both sides are bad argument, by the way. I have progressive liberal politics and I've never been shy about that. My point is that this idea that you can't make any decisions about how to live your basic life without first checking in to see if it's politically allowed is not unique to any political alignment. And it's pretty exhausting. And you know, I don't really buy it anymore. I might just be old-fashioned, but I tend to value things like respect and empathy and civility, and I just don't see a lot of that in these discussions, regardless of what side I'm looking at.
It is clear that they don't differ much from us normies, from us apoliticals, from us regular people making mistakes and doing stupid things. They want views, money, fame, and to make a name for themselves. They don't always think about politics, and they don't always want to think about politics. They even admit to not watching political content online. They want book deals and sponsorships, teams and talent managers. And I hope I got it across in this video that that's all perfectly okay. That is, in my opinion, a phenomenal thing, and I wish all of them nothing but the best. The problem is that for many years, a lot of the messages in these videos, a lot of the messages put forward by said content creators is that these are bad things, that these are things which undermine the cause, which undermine the politics of BreadTube or of the left. Being human was looked down upon. It was something that you could make content against, and you could make a lot of money off making content against. And as I've demonstrated, a lot of them are winning in our capitalist world via their anti-capitalist branding. And I think BreadTube video essayists are the ultimate example of a luxury belief in human form. I think at this rate, the decay of BreadTube is inevitable. I think that the most prominent individuals, the most prominent BreadTube video essayists have basically checked out. Lindsay Ellis is living her best life. PhilosophyTube is officially an actress. ContraPoints has unofficially moved exclusively to Patreon. Mina has become a model. I would say that BreadTube right now feels like dress-up edutainment and poorly researched videos about cops, white woman tears, or the fact that TikTok trends don't pay enough attention to systemic inequalities that make them problematic. I guess in my personal opinion, video essays right now don't feel like video essays. That is, videos intent on bringing together different people from all walks of life, from all political affiliations, to think about something, anything, no matter how serious or how trivial, more critically or from a different lens, to think about something more thoroughly, to think about something with more intent. Good cameras, good editing and lighting, wardrobe changes, podcast setups, and lo-fi music are all making these essays seem a lot better than they actually are. White allies try to explain to black women what it actually means to be black. And more formerly die-hard BreadTube video essayists are wanting to make and are moving toward making goofier content, which is great. but at the same time, I feel that they have left a wasteland of their own making. I think that the post-pandemic world has also demonstrated that the promises of radical, transformative change in the world, as well as capitalistic precarity, haven't actually transpired into anything new or beyond, well, normal life. Nothing terribly substantive has changed for the average worker, and things are only getting worse for the middle classes. It is becoming increasingly clear that BreadTube and BreadTube online work isn't saving anybody except these thought leaders and their bank accounts. I would say that the purity testing of BreadTubers has done more harm than good in the long term, exposing many social commenters and essayists to be nothing more than drama farmers, conflating their high views with actual real politic, or already educated, enlightened, and above averagely wealthy individuals projecting their enlightened views of the world onto everybody else, and onto a world which I would argue they really have no clue about. The BreadTube streamers who they berate and hate do more meaningful, widespread political activism, community engagement and praxis than they do, especially when it comes to connecting with the moderate majority, so crucial to the kinds of political change and political acceptance these BreadTube creators seemingly desire. I sincerely hope that we can have a serious, meaningful and cordial conversation about the meaning of BreadTube now and the purpose of video essays and commentary. And I hope that this video has been able to demonstrate that these thought leaders, like you and I, are humans who are flawed and are in no way going to save us from reality. Essays deserve better, and so do you.